On January 8th, Ukraine's Air Force reported shooting down 21 out of 28 Russian drones targeting the south and east of the country and intercepting 3 Russian cruise missiles. It's a pretty standard attack from Russia. The Dnipropetrovsk region experienced a drone attack in the city of Dnipro, which injured 12 people. Kherson faced heavy shelling from Russian forces, resulting in 2 deaths of civilians and several injuries. In the Kharkiv region, shelling in Kupiansk killed 1 man and injured 2 other civilians, including a child. Over 100 settlements across Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson, and Mykolaiv came under artillery fire by Russian forces. Ukrainian forces successfully repelled multiple attacks in various directions, including Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka, and Zaporizhia. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa, visiting Kyiv, pledged $37 million to NATO support for Ukraine against Russian drone strikes, and also promised the donation of mobile gas turbine generators and transformers to maintain power supplies during winter. President Zelensky, in a speech, highlighted the necessity for Europe to develop joint weapons production with Ukraine to preserve Ukrainian freedom and defend itself effectively. Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson Yuri Ihnat emphasized that Russia's escalation of missile and drone attacks strained Kyiv's air defense forces and necessitated further weapon supplies. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov revealed significant findings from an internal audit of the country's military expenditures. The investigation, which began 4 months prior, uncovered corruption crimes exceeding 10 billion hryvnia, which is approximately $262 million, related to military procurement practices. The audit found that a senior ministry official extended a previous contract, depositing about 1.5 billion into intermediary firms' accounts. This official was removed from legal duties, and legal proceedings were initiated. The Security Service, in full cooperation with the Defense Ministry, foiled a corruption plot involving 39 million in an ammunition transaction, and this intervention saved about $92 million total, like all these corruption investigations. Umerov emphasized that the Defense Ministry is working to eradicate corruption and will adopt a new procurement architecture based on NATO standards. This restructuring aims to ensure the continuous delivery of both weapons and non-lethal supplies to the armed forces. They've been implementing 2 special agencies for procurement, one for weapons and one for non-lethal things like logistical equipment, food, clothing, fuel. So it's always good news. Some people see this, news about corruption in Ukraine as negative, but they're clearly prosecuting the corruption. It looks like Umerov is definitely improving things in the defense ministry. So I think it's good. Personally, I find it to be good news. Next day, January 9th. The White House held a meeting with technology and defense industry executives in the United States to enhance Ukraine's access to advanced U.S. equipment. The meeting was attended by about a dozen leaders from venture capital firms and the technology and defense industries. Key members of the National Security Council met with industry executives from Fortem Aerospace and defense technology companies like Palantir Technologies and Anduril Industries. Drone maker Skydio, S-K-Y-D-I-O, was there, among others. The focus of the conversation was on several systems, including unmanned aerial systems, of course, how to counter incoming unmanned aerial systems, and addressing the demining challenge. The meeting aimed to help Ukraine overcome key technological challenges that have been inhibiting their progress and momentum on the battlefield. The meeting was convened by Jake Sullivan, head of the White House National Security Council, and lasted for about 5 hours. The purpose of the meeting was to reinforce the Biden administration interest in supporting Ukraine with cutting-edge U.S. equipment and to learn about new capabilities from a broader cross-section of U.S. industry. The goal was to facilitate the application of these innovations for Ukraine. Russia launched a barrage of missiles against Ukrainian targets, resulting in the deaths of 4 civilians, injuring 30 others. Ukraine mentioned disrupting several missiles targeting the country using electronic warfare measures to disrupt their targeting mechanisms. Which is something I haven't noticed as particularly common, so I thought worth noting. Ukrainian military intelligence also conducted a drone attack on the Oryol Neft Produkt oil depot in the Russian city of Oryol. So Oryol Neft Produkt means Oryol oil products. is what the name means. According to reports, one of the drones hit the oil depot and another struck the building of a local energy provider, Oriol Energo. Oriol Energy. Very simple naming schemes as Russia, as I think you're finding out. The oil depot's location is approximately 170 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. So that's the news for January 9th. For January 10th, the UN political chief warned of no foreseeable end to the war in Ukraine, highlighting the severity of recent attacks on civilian infrastructure. By the way, this whole UN speech, I think, can be summed up as you can add that Russia is doing all of this. I mean, it's really pretty one-sided here. It's Ukraine's not responsible for any of this, but just as I continue reading. The UN Human Rights Office verified around 30,000 civilian casualties, including 10,000 deaths and more than 20,000 injuries. These are, of course, verified deaths by the UN. The actual figure is much higher. They have to actually go out there and verify the deaths. The war continues to heavily impact civilians, according to this speech by the chief, particularly in frontline communities in Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. The UN reported that a recent wave of attacks has left millions without essential utilities like electricity and water. Attacks on humanitarian aid operations have increased. This is really significant, I think, with more than 50 incidents negatively impacting aid efforts in 2023. This includes bombardments hitting warehouses, leading to significant losses of relief items. There's also been a troubling increase in the attacks on medical facilities and educational institutions. Again, I think we can add here, Russia is doing this. Ukraine is not hitting medical facilities or aid warehouses. In addition, 48 countries also condemned North Korea's export and Russia's procurement of DPRK ballistic missiles in the UN, declaring these actions a violation of the UN Security Council resolution on the matter. In addition, a secret meeting in Saudi Arabia involving Ukraine, G7 allies, and global South countries discussed support for Kyiv's peace plan, with China invited but abstaining from attending, and Russia not invited. The meeting included representatives from Ukraine, G7 countries, and a small group of global South countries. The main rally support for Ukraine's conditions for holding peace talks with Russia. The discussions revolved around what is known as the peace formula, which Ukraine developed, and the principles of potential future engagement with Russia. Reportedly, the meeting did not produce significant progress. Ukraine and its G7 partners resisted calls from Global South with direct engagement to Russia. The Western partners expressed at the meeting skepticism about Russia's willingness to respect the basic tenets of any peace talks concerning Ukrainian sovereignty, given their past experience with Russian agreements. Another set of peace talks involving Ukraine and other countries is expected to take place in Switzerland, with more than 100 nations invited. This is scheduled ahead of the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, planned for January 15th through 19th, 2024. That's the news for January 10th. On January 11th, Ukrainian forces engaged in over 50 combat operations with Russian troops across several regions, including Sinkivka in the Kharkiv region, Makivka in the Luhansk region, and multiple locations in Donetsk, including Avdiivka and Marinka. The battles also extended to Zaporizhia region and the east bank of the Dnipro River. 2 Russian S-300 missiles struck a hotel in Kharkiv, causing injuries to 11 people, including several journalists. The attack also resulted in damage to 2 apartment blocks and several other buildings. In the village of Olhovatka in the Kharkiv region, a Russian guided bomb killed at least 1 person, damaging homes, a shop, and a school. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also visited Lithuania, as well as, I believe, a number of other Baltic countries, warning against Western hesitation in providing aid and emphasizing the need for stronger Ukrainian defense and ammunition replenishment. The United Nations prepared to request $0.1 billion for humanitarian assistance in Ukraine for the year 2024. And the UN, already reported that. So that is everything for January 11th. Moving on to January 12th. Very significant agreements. Ukraine and the UK announced on Friday a significant bilateral security pact. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak finalize this agreement in Kyiv. It's a comprehensive security agreement characterized as unprecedented by President Zelensky. The pact is set to last until Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, with provisions for extension if necessary. The agreement covers various aspects of security cooperation, including material and intelligence security support from the UK to Ukraine over the next decade. In the event of further Russian aggression, the UK committed in the agreement to providing swift and sustained military assistance to Ukraine. Collaboration in national cybersecurity, military training, and mutual defense industry is also part of the deal. The UK will provide a military package worth 2.5 billion British pounds to Ukraine. And there is an annual provision to support Ukraine over 10 years with an additional provision. I couldn't find the specifics of, but something about how this provision would increase if Russian aggression increased. It's supposed to sort of increase in proportion to Russia's own aggression. Also, on the 12th, Russia, although this has been going on for a bit of time, Russia has been experiencing widespread heating failures, particularly in the Moscow region. The situation has escalated to expressing significant frustration and anger towards local authorities and utility services for their failure to resolve the crisis. Residents of towns like Elektrostal, Podolsk, and Klimovsk in the Moscow region have been severely impacted. In Elektrostal, residents resorted to lighting fires on the streets to draw attention to the problem. In Podolsk, at least 21,000 people faced power outages due to a burst in the heating main at the Klimovsk specialized ammunition plant. The region has been experiencing sub-zero temperatures, with reports of indoor temperatures dropping to around 4 degrees Celsius in some residences. Temporary heating centers have been opened, and local authorities have declared a state of emergency. In Podolsk, additional boilers were turned on to provide heating. Russian authorities have arrested several officials in connection with the heating failures, very Russian solution to the problem. Investigations into power outages and the restricted supply of energy resources is ongoing. Residents have protested and launched online petitions demanding action. A notable protest saw residents demanding punishment for those responsible for the outage. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov attributed the heating issues to abnormally low temperatures and worn-out municipal infrastructure. He acknowledged the long-term nature of the infrastructure renovation problem, suggesting that it could take more than 15 years to complete. I'm sure that those residents are very comforted with that knowledge. Putin provided some emergency directives, and the heating outage is seen as a manifestation of Russia's broader decay of municipal infrastructure, which is linked to endemic corruption and mismanagement within the housing and utilities sector. And I would maybe add also that Russia's heating and power infrastructure are usually tied to municipal services, which are basically under the control of regional governments, which are under control of the federal government or the Kremlin, and been drafted into Ukraine to meet these various manpower quotas. So they don't have the people to, or the knowledge to fix these problems. So you're seeing a real decay in Russia's municipal infrastructure, which was already kind of ongoing, really accelerate. And on January 13th, the final day, we had another visit and a flurry of visits. President Zelensky, of course, visiting Baltic countries, Prime Minister Sunak from the UK visiting Ukraine. We had a visit from Foreign Minister of France, Séjourné, who emphasized that Ukraine is and will remain a priority for France. He highlighted the defense of the fundamental principles of international law that are at stake in Ukraine. The French Foreign Minister reiterated supporting Ukraine as long as necessary and acknowledged the need for additional military assistance. However, he did not announce any specific new weapon deliveries or any specifics during the visit, which I will add is pretty typical for France. They're pretty secretive about the actual aid they send to Ukraine. Very often we will not hear about any material support for Ukraine until it is basically in the country. We see photographic evidence of it in the country. So not unusual, but also a bit frustrating sometimes to not be able to measure their commitment level. Séjourné encouraged French companies to invest in various Ukrainian sectors, including transport, energy, telecoms, and water. He also discussed working on fixing EU bilateral legal issues to help French companies establish more military production facilities in Ukraine. Séjourné and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba discussed the localization of defense manufacturing in Ukraine. Kuleba mentioned that several Ukrainian and French defense companies had already concluded cooperation deals, and he saw potential for greater collaboration, which allows Ukraine to buy armaments, received fresh funding recently from the French government. Séjourné also mentioned that France's efforts to overcome objection from Hungary to supply EU financial aid to Ukraine that aid is they're working on a solution to that, and that it's crucial that aid be released for essential public services and reconstruction in the country. So that concludes the news for the week. Unless there's maybe any specific questions from our listeners or viewers, which I'm happy to try to answer. I believe that's about it. There was today a pretty breaking report about some French artillery production. I wasn't able to dig into the specifics of. And Erland, if you maybe wanted to mention what's going on at NAMO, this might be a good time in Sweden. Yeah, Erland?
Oh, well, there's apparently some good news coming out from Sweden. They are investing into increasing the output of the Karlskoga Nammo plant, which produces 155 artillery shells. So that's a good news. I don't have any specifics on how much they're investing and how much that is going to increase the output of the factory. And the Swedes, Norwegians, and Finns doesn't really publish numbers as the Germans, for instance, does. So I think it's a positive news, but we don't really know what the output increase is going to be, as far as I understand.
I vaguely remember reading one of the reports, maybe they're going to hire 2,000 new employees, which is pretty substantial. Yeah, usually we're talking about a few hundred in like artillery production, as far as I know.
Yeah, and apparently this is also part of the ASAP program from the EU. So they're getting funds both from the EU, European, what's the name again? German aid. You can help me out there. I forgot the name of the European Peace Facility. Has this ASAP program where a part of the money is going to investments of for basically increase production capacity. So some of the money is coming from there, some from the from the Swedish government, and that's good to see that it's finally being applied. It's very, very late, considering the fact that this was launched almost a year ago, and yeah, I was expecting this to take off a little bit before, but finally it seems to be working.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we saw pretty strong signals from several European countries, like in the last couple of weeks, that they're going to try to fix this problem, because as we reported, or as everyone reported, there was basically an admission of failure by the European Union to produce enough shells last year. But it looks like this year there's at least a strong signal coming from the major players that they're going to try to increase production pretty significantly. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. Would you agree, Erlen?
Yeah, and it is frustrating though to see that the politicians tend to look at all other options than putting actually cash on the table to increase the production lines. I know there are many factories that are privately owned in Europe that cannot just ramp up production by political orders, or that they need cash flow to be able to invest, and the problem is that the political will is there, but it seems that the decision-making processes have been way too long when it comes to this. And we have the same problem in Norway. The politicians seems to be trying to avoid investing, and they said, "Oh, we're going to place this huge contract, which is going to give liquidity enough for Nammo to expand the factory at Raufoss," but the contracting is taking forever, and now we have this situation that nothing has basically been done since the start of the full-scale invasion, only minor investments. And now they are also waiting for an answer from the ASAP program, and I don't know if the government has any plan B if that doesn't work out. So hopefully that works out, but it really frustrates me that the politicians has been taking this long to understand that the capacity had to be expanded.
Yeah, absolutely, and we hope to see more, long-term commitments like this in the near future, like really serious commitments to actually increase overall production, because that's what we need here. We need governments to turn on the tap, and then the companies are more than happy to start, really increasing the scale of the production if they get the assurances needed. So great, thank you very much for that additional report, Erland. So we just have a few questions from the audience, and then we'll go ahead and conclude the news segment. So one question from the audience is, it seems like the heating and electric issues in the Moscow region are pretty significant. Why doesn't the Russian government censor it? So, I mean, that's a great question. Obviously, it's sort of speculation. There's, we call this Kremlinology, right? Like why we try to look inside the Kremlin and understand the logic behind certain things. And sometimes it can seem odd, like why they lie about one thing and tell the truth about another thing and things like that. In this case, I think the issue is that the problem is just too widespread. There's thousands and thousands of people. When you have a really bad problem and get these like basically Soviet style videos where, I mean, in the old days, they would take a photo of themselves, like we're the, Dnipropetrovsk, commune, third, whatever in the oblast, like, and they would all take their picture together and send a letter saying, we protest the conditions or things like that, right? It's a very kind of Soviet solution. You had a lot of that going on. And then you just had, as you mentioned, just a flurry of Telegram activity. It's really difficult for the Russian media to censor something like that. So rather than do that, they're going to try to kind of soften the problem, right? They're going to try to, most importantly, insulate Putin from the problem, right? That's what they usually do in these circumstances where there is a clear failure of the government to provide basic help to the citizens. It's the local administrators who are corrupt and stupid and, not listening to the population. And Putin, who is of course busy running the government and like protecting Russia from the big bad, NATO and all that, like he wasn't paying attention because he was busy and he didn't know any better. And now he's been made aware of the problem. He'll get rid of all those dummies and, sort it out, right? That's usually the approach they take here. It's like a very old-fashioned approach to problem management in Russia, is like the Tsar didn't know any better. It's the evil nobles around him that are scheming. And he's a pure of heart, right? So that's like the goal in this type of information environment, in my opinion. They can't censor it because it's just too widespread. It would get out. So that means they have to kind of get on top of it. And the way they get on top of it is, in this case, their only real option here is to protect the big guy by having some people fall on the sword and saying, oh, we arrested some people. We're going to put some money into it. We have a big 15-year plan, blah, 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 right? It's never going to get fixed. That's the truth here. So that's question one. The second question is it true that Ukraine's electronic warfare capability is much better now with Ukraine downing more missiles using EW? It's a good question. When it comes to electronic warfare, it's just too spooky booky. We don't know much about it. It's something that Ukraine is very quiet about for good reason. And a lot of the capabilities that countries are providing in terms of electronic warfare are probably not being publicly discussed. It's just not really an area that there's a lot of secrets that a lot of people are interested in keeping in that field. So we don't really get to learn much about it. But I think it's safe to say that based on help from Ukraine's allies that, and obviously their own internal efforts, that due to the prevalence of drone and missile attacks, that their electronic warfare capabilities have probably improved pretty substantially. And that might account for why even these mass Russian missile barrages are less successful. But unfortunately, John Ridge isn't here. I would like to hear his opinion on that. So we'll maybe ask John in the future if there's anything if he can discuss a little bit like electronic warfare disrupting missiles. Jonathan, did you want to say something?
No, we do have John's having connection issues today, but we do have him in the back channels, and he's able to answer some of your questions, which we are trying very hard to get through. So please bear with us. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. And so the third and final question is, how likely is it that France will provide older Rafale 2000D bombers? So this sounds like a question, the question asker already knows more than me if they're referencing 2000D specifically. I know that these Rafales have been talked about pretty extensively. People are definitely for it. I think, you know, at least John and like a few of the others who I sort of, you know, like Latin aviation and stuff, who I kind of respect their opinion when it comes to aviation matters. I think they really believe that like Ukraine needs the F-16. Like at the end of the day, there's a few good options like the Rafale and like the Swedish Gripen and things like that. But the, you know, Ukraine needs an aircraft that's flexible and that has a lot of countries that have stuff for it and that they can just kind of invest all their energy into. And in their view, like things like the Rafale and the Gripen are like distractions from that, right? But I think there's another school of thought that's like Ukraine needs everything they can get, and you know, I personally am just not like versed enough in aviation matters to really say for sure. Erlen, like you at least have like a little bit of a military background. Like, do you have any opinion on this?
Well, I am not an aviator or an aviation nerd or geek, but as far as I understand, the Su-24s that Ukraine use in the bombing role and also to drop missiles are getting a substantial amount of hours on their wings, which means at some point they need to be replaced. If the Rafale 2000D can take that role, I'm sure that's going to be positive in the long term. I understand the people who says Ukraine should be going only on one platform, F-16s. I understand that probably logistically wise and training wise for all the pilots, then it's gonna make more sense. But as long as Ukraine is not getting you know the numbers of F-16s that they are that they need, I guess getting a bunch of Rafale 2000s is going to help. I think it's going to, in the end, come down a lot to what's going to happen in the US the next year. But
Yeah,
John is saying that he's trying to connect, so he probably is going to be able to give a better answer to that.
excellent. Well, so I think I guess if we want to wait for John to come up and address some of that, should we? I don't want to go to the next segment yet if we got to get John up here.
I think we'll just give John a minute if that's all right, because he's in the back channels. He has expanded on the answers you gave, gents. So with regards to the EW, John's answer was that Ukraine can very likely jam, spoof, or otherwise deny Russian GLONASS GNSS navigation. But in order to electronically defeat a KH-101 or Caliber missile, you must also defeat its terrain contour matching navigation, which requires Ukraine to jam the missile's radar altimeter. So basically, you have to rely. I call it, these are John's words, of course. Rely on the missile's digital scene mapping area correlation navigation system being unable to generate a good guidance solution for the previously given route that the missile is, of course, programmed with before launch. So yeah, TURFCOM, which is terrain contour matching, and DSMAC, digital scene matching area correlation, were originally developed to enable navigation before the development of GPS. So that's John's answer for the EW question. And I can see he's still trying to connect, so
I'm curious, Jonathan, I guess, well, I got you here. What was the reaction in the British media to this recent agreement with Ukraine?
Overwhelmingly positive. Whoever people, I think, it's across a wide spectrum of UK society, not just British society, but UK society and beyond. There is um, uh, not just a demand that the UK continues its current level of support, but a demand that it does more to ensure that Ukraine finishes, that this war finishes as soon as possible through Ukrainian liberation and the return of its deported, stolen people. And we are all aware that the only route to ensure this is by Ukrainian victory on the battlefield. And it's not, that is not currently achievable with the current aid deliveries. So yeah, great news. And even supporters of Rishi, well, people who are not ordinarily supporters of Rishi were very happy to see the news this week. But it gives me great pleasure to hand over to John, who I can just see has connected.
Hello, John. You want to give us a little mic check there? John might be having some a mic situation.
Well, in the meantime, I just wanted to add that to what Jonathan was speaking to, that the British government has dedicated 200 million pounds for a drone program, and I think that's a first that we've seen such a large commitment from a European country, specifically to drone procurement for Ukraine, and I think that's wonderful news, and it really it demonstrates the impact that drone warfare has on this conflict and in general military strategies and tactics.
Yeah, I think last week Andrew mentioned, like, he basically said government should give Ukraine $2 billion for their drone program. That would basically be enough. That's the number we're talking about here. So, I mean, effectively, the UK just gave 10% of that, right?
Yeah, and I hope that there are more governments that are going to jump on this. It's going to, make a huge difference if more countries put money, basically give money to Ukraine and say build drones for this money. And this can be done also in other European countries. So I don't see this problem of just giving money to Ukraine. That's someone is or some people are very hesitant to that, but you could set up very quickly a drone construction program in country as well. So that has to happen as soon as possible, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really serious issue. Russia is pretty serious about increasing their drone production. Ukraine obviously is serious, but they need all the help they can get because Russia has more resources at their disposal. Give Ukraine a leg up. They had a clear advantage of this early on, but that can always change if we let up. John, you want to test your mic?
Can y'all hear me now? Hello?
Yep.
Wonderful. I didn't have my thing plugged all the way in.
No worries, John. So we were talking a little bit about missiles and electronic warfare, John. So if you want to maybe, you can share with us whatever you'd like to about it. I think the general question is like, does it seem like Ukraine's getting better at this? Is this a significant aspect of Ukraine's air defense strategy? What do you think about all this? Go ahead.
So the Ukrainian Air Force, they have reported or claimed to have defeated various different Russian missiles via electronic warfare on a couple occasions. They don't claim it super frequently. I can think of maybe including this one 3, maybe 4 times off the top of my head. So it's not something that gets referenced in their public-facing reports very often. So it's difficult to really say if they're getting better at it or not. There has been some other reporting separate from the cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, etc., that they were working on a national system to jam and spoof the GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System, used for the Shaheds. I'm not really sure what the status of that program is, if it's something that's been fielded or deployed, but my understanding is that's something that it has been a work in progress for a while now.
Great, thanks, John. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about missiles and electronic warfare, or that's pretty much it?
Oh, I'm not sure how much of what I sent y'all had referenced, but generally it's possible to electronically defeat a cruise missile. It's very challenging and requires a very specific set of circumstances, but it's possible. Typically speaking, a modern cruise missile like KH-101 Caliber, TLAM, Tomahawk Land Attack Missile, operated by the U.S., typically speaking, they will incorporate 4 guidance modes. All of them will have at a minimum inertial navigation, and that's the core of the guidance systems, and the other means more or less they're used to correct the inherent error that accumulates in an inertial navigation system. Essentially, you can think of INS as it's a series of sensors. You have an accelerometer along all 3 axes, and then you'll have a gyro sensor to measure rotation for each of those 3 axes as well. And that allows you to measure acceleration, get velocity, and then get position from that without an external reference point. The issue with it is, of course, that no accelerometer is perfect. There's always going to be a little bit of error in the measurements that are making. And so you'll have a constant error in acceleration. You integrate that to get your velocity. That constant error in acceleration becomes a linearly increasing error with time and velocity. So the longer the missile is in flight, the error on its estimated velocity from the INS will just linearly increase, and then a linear error in velocity becomes a quadratic error with time for position. So the error in your position estimate from inertial navigation increases with respect to time of flight squared, so it increases rather dramatically. Especially for a cruise missile with a hour and a half flight time, that just becomes unacceptable. So you need a way to more or less correct that error. And the 3 ways that that's usually done are obviously GNSS in the modern sense, and then also TERCOM, terrain contour matching navigation, and DSMAC, or I'm not sure if it's an initialism or acronym, but in any case, MAC, digital scene mapping area correlation, which more or less you'll have a series of reference images of the terrain along the route the missile is supposed to follow. There's a camera on the underside of the missile. It takes pictures of the ground as it flies over, and compares it to what to its reference images, and then does some math with them basically to figure out where it actually is relative to its planned trajectory, and then corrects itself based upon that. Terrain contour matching, it's a radar altimeter, measures the distance between the missile and the ground, and then you'll have a reference map of terrain heights uploaded in the missile. Does the same thing, does some math to determine, based upon what its current altitude is, what its altitude should be relative to the terrain based upon these maps, and then corrects accordingly. And then GNSS just directly corrects the INS. So in order to electronically defeat a cruise missile, you have to defeat multiple guidance implementations. You have to deny the GNSS, you have to jam or spoof it, and this is where it becomes tricky, you then have to defeat the terrain contour matching, which usually means finding a way to jam the missile's radar altimeter, which is possible. It's challenging, but it's definitely possible. And one of the things that's been reflected in US and UK and French procurement, for example, as well as German for Taurus, is there have been continual upgrades to their radar altimeters to make them jam and spoof resistant, specifically to prevent it from being electronically defeated. And then that then brings us to the digital scene mapping area correlation. There is no way to electronically defeat this because it's just taking optical spectrum images or optical region images or infrared, depending on how it's implemented, of the ground beneath the missile. There's no way you can jam or spoof that. So if you can defeat the GNSS, the satellite navigation, if you can defeat the terrain contour navigation, then you then have to hope that the missile is routed such that the digital scene mapping area correlation can't generate a good guidance solution. So if the missile has been programmed to fly a route over relatively featureless terrain, say over an area that's just like flat fields full of snow, no real features to differentiate, or kind of take a more global outlook if you're navigating through a featureless desert, if those circumstances align, then you can electronically defeat a cruise missile. But again, it's very, very challenging. I'm assuming it was cruise missiles that they were referring to. Electronically defeating ballistic missiles it's possible, but it's even more difficult because, again, INS error accumulates with respect to time. Ballistic missiles have a very short time of flight. So the advantage of that is that unless you're essentially, able to GNSS deny the missile from the moment of launch to the moment of impact throughout the entire duration of flight, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to jam it for long enough in terminal when there's only maybe 90 seconds left of flight time to be able to really dramatically increase its lack of precision.
Great, thanks, John. Well, I could talk with you about missiles all day, John, but we do have a couple other segments we got to get to, and then we want to discuss some stuff with the military panel, which you're more than welcome to join us for.